Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to on this lovely morning in London. When I left for London yesterday, I was still concerned about having forgotten my umbrella because it's always risky to go to London without an umbrella. But with this perfect sunshine this morning, it's absolutely no problem. It's not raining, and it's not raining. It's a perfect crossover to our first presentation today, as I'm trying to give you a world supply and demand outlook for the next year. And I will indeed only try it, because as you are all aware, the market has been turned upside down over the last couple of weeks. And to avoid any confusion, I'm not giving a price forecast here. If you ask me where prices will be in 3 months, 3 days, or even 3 hours, I will probably not be in a position to give you a forecast for that, given what has happened over the past couple of weeks. But I will try to give you our view of the coffee production and the coffee demand going forward. If you look at the price graph, we are really seeing a strong reaction of the New York Arabica market to the weather concerns in Brazil. If we had had this seminar 5 or 6 weeks ago, we would be probably discussing other things or in a different way than we will do it today. At the end, or in early November, the market was just above the $1 per pound barrier, and everybody was talking about future supply overhang, with Brazil coming out of a record off-year crop, Colombia seeing a very strong recovery in its production, and Vietnam also headed for a bumper crop in 13-14. And nowadays everybody is concerned about the supply outlook for Brazil, with the real threat of a deficit returning to the coffee market, which has not been the case for the past 4 years, according to our numbers. So in February alone, the Arabica market surged by 44%. The Robusta market also rose on spillover strength, but the rise there in the Robusta was much more modest. It was a little bit below 20% in February alone. But as you can see, since the lows in early November, the market has, with $1.90 yesterday or 93, the market has now surged about 90% within a couple of months, which is, of course, a very strong reaction. There have been days when the market surged by 15 cents, but 15 cents is not uncommon for the coffee market. If you look at the last coffee rally, or not the last, but at a previous coffee rally in 1997, you can see that you had differences between the intraday high on the one day and the intraday low on the next day of more than 60 cents per pound. So the coffee market can show quite strong reactions if there are weather concerns, and we are indeed in the midst of a weather market. And there are not weather concerns in whichever country. There are weather concerns in Brazil, and the supply in coffee has become more concentrated over the last over the last decade or so. Brazil is accounting now for about a third of global coffee production, and if you add Vietnam with its 27 million bag crop, you have easily reached 50% of global supply in these two countries alone. So weather problems in these two countries now have a much more now have much more capacity to move the market in one direction or the other than 2 or 3 decades ago, when supply was not that much concentrated. If you look at the speculative community or their positions, then you can clearly see that the recent surge in values has also been supported by their repositioning. In blue you can see here the rise in the New York price, and in black you can see that the managed money category, the speculators, as I would say have really increased their position, and they are now about 24,000 lots net long, and previously they were net short. Were having bearish views on the market, but now everything has moved very quickly to a net long position, and this has significantly contributed to the surge in values over the last couple of weeks. The Arabica premium over Robustas has also risen significantly lately, together with the surge in the Arabica market, coming down from levels of 190 per pound during the price boom period in the mid of 2011. The market had collapsed down back to 25 cents per pound as the Arabica premium over Robustas. But over the past couple of weeks, this premium has risen in line with the surge in the Arabica market, because the Robusta market, as I already said before, has not risen to the same extent. And we are now back at a premium of nearly $1 per pound for Arabicas over Robustas, if I incorporate yesterday's dealings. Taking a short look at the differentials, you can also see some quite notable developments that have happened here over the last couple of weeks. Interestingly, the Brazilian premium, or the discount over the New York price, has not changed significantly recently. So this concern over Brazil's crop outlook has not yet made its way into the physical market. It's still in the futures market, and the Brazilian naturals are still trading at a discount to the New York market as of now. The other development that you can see, where you can see a fundamental development in the coffee market, is that the other malts category has risen to a slight premium over the Colombian malts category, which is rather unusual for the coffee market. But here you can clearly see the effect of the leaf rust concerns in Central America, and at the same time the strong recovery in Colombian output, so that the Central American origins grouped together in the other malts group are now even trading at a slight premium over the Colombian malts, and both of them, of course, at a premium over the New York market. But as you can see, with regard to the Colombian malts, clearly below the height reached during the years when Colombian production declined significantly, whereas the other malts premium is quite significantly at the moment. If you put this together, or come back to the fundamentals, we currently see global coffee production at 86 million bags for Arabica in 13-14, and Robusta production at 64.1 million bags, which together makes a total world coffee crop in the coffee year 13-14 of 150.1 million bags. So that's our latest estimate. And as you can quite clearly see here, the biennial cycle in Brazil is more or less clearly shown in the ups and downs in Arabica supply, whereas the Robusta supply has risen quite steadily over the recent years, with Vietnam being, of course, the main factor behind this development. If you add the consumption, then you can see here that we are currently seeing a surplus in 13-14 of 7.2 million bags for coffee as a whole, Arabica and Robusta together, compared to global consumption. And this will be, according to our numbers, the fourth consecutive surplus in a row. In the previous years, you could clearly see alternating surpluses and deficits, just in line with the Brazilian cyclicality, but with global coffee production having reacted to the period of high prices in 2010, 2011, we are currently in the midst of a pronounced surplus phase, and whether this will change or not will be the topic of my following presentation. Taking first a look at the prospects for global coffee demand. As you can see here, global coffee exports are more or less rising steadily, which in other words means there is demand, global demand for coffee, because exports of the one country are imports of the other country, and if imports and exports are rising steadily, there seems to be rising demand for coffee as a whole. Total coffee exports, total coffee trade in relation to world coffee production is about 78%. So about 78% of all coffee produced is being traded, whereas the rest is consumed domestically in producing countries. What are the factors driving world coffee consumption? One factor, of course, there's a rising global population. If you take a look at this graph, the world population has doubled from 3 billion in 1960 to 6 billion at around the turn of the century. Currently we are at about 7 billion people on this planet, and according to the forecasts, the world population will continue to increase to about 9 billion sometime after 2040. This means, in other words, that there are 75 million people each year on the globe which are potential coffee consumers, which is a good thing, of course, for any coffee producer or exporter. So the potential is there, and the potential will continue to increase in terms of global population. But most of this population increase that we are seeing or will be seeing in the next couple of years will be in countries that so far have a rather low per capita consumption. As you can see, a very large increase is foreseen by the United Nations in Africa, in some Asian regions here, the Middle East, not so much in the high consumption areas of Europe and North America, where you have a rather a stagnant population or even a deteriorating population in some countries or regions. This poses opportunities and challenges at the same time for future coffee consumption. The opportunities, if consumption or if the world population rises in low per capita countries, is of course that there is still a lot of untapped potential for coffee, and the challenge is, of course, that you have convinced these people to become coffee consumers, because coffee consumption is something that you do consciously. It's not like grains or sugar or whatever commodity, where the consumption comes more or less as a byproduct of the consumption of other products. Coffee is a commodity that you consume or have to consume consciously, either you like it or not, so either you drink it or not, and it's not like increasing your meat consumption and by this way increasing the grain demand in the world, because the grain is needed to feed the cattle or the pigs that you eventually eat. So this poses opportunities and challenges at the same time. As I said, most of this population increase will be in countries with a low per capita consumption or with low overall consumption at this time. If you look at the 10 largest coffee consumption areas in the world, you see very few of these countries where the future population increase will happen in this top 10 list, which is based on the 13-14 coffee year, where you can see that the United States is still the largest coffee consuming market in the world, closely followed by Brazil and Germany already at a certain distance. Then you have many European countries in this ranking: France, Italy, Russia, Spain, the United Kingdom, and these countries still make up the better part of global consumption as of now, as these top 10 account for about 61-62% of global coffee offtake. The good thing, also a good thing for future consumption prospects for coffee, is that global coffee consumption is not very closely correlated to the world economy, which is good in times like this, where we see economic crises in several countries across the world. If you look at significant global crises that occurred over the last couple of decades, like the current euro crisis or the Lehman Brothers crisis 2007-2008 in the US, or the 9/11 crisis or the Asia crisis, you see that global coffee consumption continued to rise almost uninterruptedly, even at times of very high fluctuations in the rate of world economic growth, according to IMF numbers. So we expect that global coffee consumption will continue to rise going forward, and will not be very much affected by economic troubles in this country or that country, which is especially good, as I said, at current times. If you sum this up, as I said, coffee demand has proved to be quite recession-proof of the past decades. The world population continues to rise by 75 million people per year, and these are all potential coffee consumers. In the low per capita consumption areas, in traditional tea drinking countries like China or India, there is of course a lot of untapped potential for coffee making inroads, but I think things have to be kept in perspective, because dietary habits change quite slowly. This is what history tells us, and at least for the masses, I think it can be said that that tea will remain the drink of the masses or the ordinary Joe for the time being in countries like China and India, where coffee is really a drink for the people who are better off and who can afford to drink coffee. And last but not least, tea is also perceived by many as a smart, healthy drink option, and coffee not to the same degree. I mean, for coffee there are many surveys out there whether coffee is good for your health or not. Some of them come to the conclusion it's good, some come to the conclusion it's very good, and some come to the conclusion it's not so good. For tea, there is more unanimous agreement that it's healthier than coffee. So this is probably another challenge to overcome differing views on this. But in summary, the world needs more coffee going forward, and if you assume a rather conservative future annual increase of 2.2% per annum, you will arrive at global coffee consumption of around 170 million bags by 2020. If you compare this with the current production of 150 million bags, this means that 20 million bags of coffee are needed by then to meet future consumption needs, which is quite a significant volume. So how are the prospects for supply? Taking a look at 14-15 initially, and starting with Brazil. As I already indicated before, there is currently a lot of uncertainty surrounding the crop outlook in Brazil, and this is mainly due to the fact that we haven't seen a lot of rain in Brazil so far in 2014, especially in January and February. This is a problem because January and February is a very important time for the development of the coffee cherries, and this is also the problem that differentiates the current uncertainty from similar developments in the past. January and February are those months where the coffee fruits that are on the branches of the trees develop, and where the bean swells and the cherry swells and where the coffee cherry has a very significant development period. And we are now seeing a lot of we are now seeing the drought and lack of rains, and so nobody really knows what is inside the cherries. I mean, in the past, when we had drought, it was often that it led to a failure of the flowering, that you didn't have cherries on the tree. Then you can assess the damage quite good, because you have a lack of cherries on the trees. Now you have the cherries on the trees because the flowering and the fruit set was okay. But then the drought set in, and you cannot really see what's inside the cherries that are on the branches, whether they have developed properly or not. And this differentiates the current drought from droughts that we have seen before. But initially everything was okay with the crop. I mean, the first rains started more or less on time at the end of September, and then there were irregular rains, but sufficient rains at least for a successful flowering. As I said before, there was even very lots of rain, even excess rains in December, as you can see here on the slides in Espiritu Santo, where we have really 300% of the normal average rains during December, and even in the also in the other areas the rain was more or less sufficient in December. But in January and February, in the yellow and in the red bars here, you can see the high deficiency. This is a ranking according to the importance for Brazil. Here the upper part makes up the areas in Minas Gerais, the main coffee producing state. You can see a high deficiency of at least 50% and up to 90% in many of these upper three areas, but also a lot of rain deficiency here in Espiritu Santo, in Sao Paulo, and also here in Bahia. Minas Gerais is the state that accounts for about 55% of total Brazilian production, so it's clear that problems here lead to a lot of uncertainty in the global market, because they can turn the picture upside down with regard to total Brazilian production prospects. And as I said before, it's difficult to assess the damage right now, but we are currently have downgraded our crop potential for 14-15 by 15%. We started with a potential of 56 million bags for 14-15. So some were even seeing it at 60 million bags, or even above that. If you look at the numbers of other analysts, we started at 56 million bags, downgraded this by 15%. So we are currently arriving at a potential crop next year of 48 million bags, which would be down from 52.8 million in 13-14, which was a record crop for an off year in Brazil. But as I said before, this number comes around with a lot of uncertainty. It's not more than a rough guesstimate, I have to admit at this point, because it's still rather early to assess the damage, and I think the real damage will only be seen once harvesting starts in May. But this is our best guess at this moment. But what can be seen is, if it is realized, it will be the first year since the late 1970s that there are two consecutive declines in Brazilian production, and this is, of course, a key factor for the concern in the market, because this has not been seen for decades, that Brazilian production declines 2 years in a row. So what was supposed to be an on year in Brazil, 14-15, may turn out to be the second consecutive off year. And it's also interesting to look at the wide swings in production estimates that have occurred over recent months, and this is alone is an indication that the situation should be taken with a lot of caution, because people who were still talking of a crop of more than 60 million bags are currently talking of a crop below 50 million bags, which is a quite wide swing within 6 or 7 weeks. How about the other producers? Going quickly through a number of origins. You can see here that Colombian production is rebounding quite significantly after the years of despair. In 13-14 so far, in the first 4 months for which hard numbers are available, you can see the red bar. This year's production, there has been quite a significant rebound in output. so far in the season, and we expect this to continue, so that we have a quite optimistic outlook for Colombia, seeing the 13-14 crop potentially at 12 million bags, up from 9.9 million before. So this alone is up from 7.7 million in 11-12. So this would be a rebound of more than 4 million bags alone from this origin within just 2 years. With the potential for further increases in 14-15, because more trees are coming into production after the replanting program. On the other side, we have seen a lack of or a drop in fertilizer sales in reaction to the previous low price environment the market has been in over the last 2 years. So there are two effects that are working in different directions. More trees coming back into production, and probably less fertilization and application of crop inputs in reaction to the previous low price environment. Peru will see a significant drop in production in 14-15. We are seeing it down at 3.3 million bags, which is 2 million bags less than the record crop in 11-12. Also a quite significant decline there. How about the Central American origins and Mexico, where the leaf rust problems are spreading? For Honduras, there may be a slight increase in 13-14 because more trees that have been planted over there, partly offsetting the problems from leaf rust. But if there had not been leaf rust, the increase in output there would have been much stronger. So there is an effect of leaf rust there as well. But the offsetting effect from the more trees that enter production is, for the time being, a little bit shadowing the leaf rust problems if you only look at their total production numbers. Mexico, there may be a very strong decline in 13-14. We have downgraded this as local associations. Ambicafe have just reduced their crop outlook for 13-14 quite significantly last week, and for the time being I adopted this number here in our approach. So here you can see the leaf rust problems quite strongly. Guatemala, you will also probably see a further decline there going forward. And if you put together all the Central American origins, not just the big ones, Guatemala and Honduras, but also the three smaller ones, you can indeed see here the effects of the leaf rust fungus, with production down about 2 million bags in just 2 years, which is quite a significant decline. For Africa, we see a very small increase in 13-14 from 12-13. If you compare it with 11-12, the increase is much stronger due to higher output in Uganda in 12-13 and also in Ethiopia. Vietnam and Indonesia. If you look at the Vietnamese crop numbers, you find a lot of crop numbers from different analysts, some seeing it as high as 30 million bags, others seeing it as low as 23 million bags in 13-14. We have pegged the 13-14 crop at 25.8 million bags, and our crop estimates for Vietnam are based on the import flow that we are seeing in destination countries. For past crops, we always look at each and every country that is importing coffee in the world, for which we have, as we think, quite reliable data. How many quantities arrived out of Vietnam, and this is our base for the Vietnamese estimate. Then we add domestic consumption and then arrive at a number for the past crop years, whereas the future crops are, of course, estimates based on evidence about planting areas, weather, and things like that. For 13-14, as I said, we're seeing 25.8 million bags, with potentially a slight decline in 14-15, as the country has had back-to-back bumper crops. If you take the view of others, you can also get numbers for a further increase in Vietnam, depending more or less what you like. I mean, with regard to Indonesia, we are also seeing a small decline in 14-15 by about 1 million bags due to unfavorable weather with a lot of wetness. So we see the new crop down at 10.5 million bags from 11.5 million bags in 13-14. So even here, we think that the recent increase may have come to a small stop for the time being, as far as Vietnam is concerned. If you put everything together for 14-15, we come to the conclusion right now that there may be a cumulative drop in world coffee production in 14-15 of 5 million bags. So this is based, as you can see, on a drop in the Brazilian crop by 4.8 million bags, which I said before comes with a lot of uncertainties and which is just a preliminary number. Vietnam and Indonesia declines of about 1 million bags, probably another 1 million bag increase in Colombia, small increase in India, and potentially a recovery starting in Central America in 14-15 to the tune of about 1.5 million bags. Then you arrive at this number, but these are still, as I said, these still come with some uncertainty. But if you take this as a base, you come at a reduction by 5 million bags. Coffee currencies play a major role, and I've plotted down here the currencies of some important coffee production countries in the world, and you can see that from the 1st of January 2013 up to now, a lot of these currencies have depreciated significantly, with the Indonesian rupiah leading the pack with a depreciation by 21%, followed by Colombia nearly 16% and Brazil with 14%. This has brought some relief to coffee producers, because the previous decline in the New York and the London futures markets has been partly offset by the depreciation of their currencies, because it increases the return of dollar-denominated coffee sales in their local currencies. For the time being, I don't see most of these currencies gaining back value, because a lot of these depreciations are some way connected to the tapering of global monetary policy, especially that of the US Federal Reserve, which is drawing capital out of emerging markets, especially with regard to Brazil. I think it can be expected that the local currency may remain weak going forward, which is, of course, in the interest of local producers. So what are the conclusions? Global coffee production has responded quite significantly to the high prices that we have seen in 2010, 2011, and production rose by 26 million bags over the 3 seasons to 12-13, which led to the previous oversupply. That is, if you look at the market right now, obviously already something of the distant past, if you look how market quotations are surging right now. And as a result of this, the market is currently still digesting its 4th consecutive surplus. As I said, Brazilian beans are still being quoted at a discount to the New York market, so there is concern in the futures market, but not yet in the physical market. And if you assume a 5 million bag, a near 5 million bag reduction in Brazil, have more or less offsetting changes elsewhere, and a further 3 million rise in consumption in 14-15, which is the rate at which consumption grew over the last couple of years, it could well be the case that the coffee market will enter a deficit in 14-15 from a total supply and demand point of view, which would be the first, as I said before, after 4 consecutive surpluses. But even if there is a deficit in 14-15, if you just look at the broad numbers, I think there is not yet the danger that the world is running out of coffee, because stocks have accumulated during the surplus period, and especially in Brazil, there are still stocks, and coffee exports from there have accelerated recently. So even if there is a small deficit in 14-15, I think there will be no immediate danger of the world running out of coffee. But, and a big but, there is still considerable uncertainty with regard to the crop losses in Brazil. And if there is uncertainty, the only sure thing that you can say is that volatility can be expected further down the road. I would not rule out that if the weather conditions remain critical in Brazil, if it remains dry in March, that the market may even rise up to the highs we have seen just 3 years ago in 2011. I wouldn't rule this out, but if once harvesting starts, the concern it becomes apparent that the concerns have been a little bit too exaggerated, that the market will collapse completely back to well-known levels where the market has been trading in over the past couple of weeks. So everything is possible, which is quite a problem for everybody making a business decision right now. But we are in the weather market, and the weather market is unpredictable. Every analyst is always smart in finding a smart explanation in hindsight for what has happened and why it has happened. But making a forecast in a weather market is always a very tricky thing, and especially a price forecast is a very tricky thing in a weather market, where it can easily ruin your reputation. But as I said, I think everything is possible right now due to the weather problems in Brazil, and we will have to wait until harvesting starts to really assess the damage. And after this, I think the dust settles and the picture clears up, and then business will get back into calmer waters. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.